Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Christian and Ambassador Training. This is the 6th week in our Genesis series, and this week I'm going to do things a little differently. Instead of posting one longer video, I'll be posting two shorter videos. That's because last week we talked about the story of Noah, but we didn't have time to really delve into the end of that story, which is found in chapter 8, verse 20, through chapter 9, verse 17. And that's what we're going to talk about in this first video. If you'd like to follow along in your own Bibles, go ahead and turn there now. Now, in Noah's story up until now, he builds an ark that carries him out of his dead, corrupted society, through the flood and into a new creation. Then, when Noah finally steps out of the ark, he makes a sin offering to God. Sin offering here, what he's doing is he's offering repentance for what the human race has done so far, for how the human race has misused its power, has misused its place as stewards of creation, and misused each other as people with the image of God. And so Noah offers this sin offering that is this message to God that we're going to try to do better in the future. And God accepts the offering. Obviously, God's not naive. It says right there in that verse that man's heart is bent on corruption, bent on evil from birth. But he still accepts the sin offering, and he promises to never again unmake the whole earth. Now, to understand the significance of this promise, we need to understand the ancient Hebrew conception of the physical world, because the flood had an incredible significance. So this is kind of an artist's rendition of what the ancient Hebrew thought the physical world, how they thought it was composed. So there's the waters above and the waters below. And holding back the waters above, there's the firmament. Firmament, the word literally means a hammered out sheet. So they thought that there was this sheet up in the sky that was holding back the waters above, and the waters below are being held back by the earth. And in this bubble of sky and earth, that's where there is order. And everywhere else, there's chaos. But God is ultimately in control. That's why we see God here at the top in the heaven of heavens. And what happens in the flood is God opens up the firmament and releases the fountains of the deep. And the waters that surround the earth come crashing back in. And this is the exact reverse of what God did in creation when he separated the waters above from the waters below. So this is an unmaking of the world. And what God is promising here is that he will never again unmake the world. We have this idea about Revelation, about the end times, that God's going to destroy the earth and make us a new one. It's a misconception. What's really happening there, fire in the Hebrew mindset is not, it's destructive, yes, but it's primarily a refining power. It refines the earth. It burns away the dross and leaves behind only what is according to God's will and purpose. It leaves behind only the good. And so the earth that we have, that's the earth that we're going to have forever. That's the promise that God makes here. So how is he going to fulfill his promise in spite of the fact that mankind is corrupt? How is he going to keep mankind from just repeating what happened before and completely destroying the earth and totally corrupting it to the point where it's no good anymore? Just how's he going to do that? So he puts a few measures in place. First, notice that there are two significant differences between what he says in the beginning of chapter 9 to Noah and the commission that he gives to Adam and Eve in Genesis 1:28. In Genesis 1:28, God says to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the birds of the air and every creeping thing that lives on the face of the earth. So there God gives Adam a commission, not just to be fruitful and multiply, not just to fill the earth, but also to rule over it, to subdue it, to have dominion over it. He does not give that commission to Noah because mankind has become corrupt. And mankind has shown that not only can they not rule over nature, they can't even rule over their own individual passions. So to prevent man's corruption from spreading to the rest of nature and corrupting nature, destroying the earth, God puts a dread of man on all living creatures. And this creates a sort of control line. If you have ever read about the techniques that firefighters use to fight wildfires, a lot of times they'll burn out a section of the forest so that area is already burned, and when the wildfire comes to it, it can't spread any further. And so it doesn't spread on to destroy the rest of the forest. And in the same way, God makes this control line between us and all the living creatures of the earth to keep our corruption from spreading to them. Second, God gives 3 commands to help mankind, to guide them in ruling over their animalistic passions. So the first is we're allowed to eat animals, but he gives us a command not to eat animals alive. We're not to descend to the level of animal predators because we're more. We're a higher order of being than that, and we're not to descend to that level. In addition, we're to have a respect for life because life belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. And so we need to have a respect for life, not just human life, but also animal life. We're to treat them humanely. The second command God gives is not to murder other humans. Like I said, we're a higher order of being. Implicit in his command, particularly the way it's expressed when he talks about the lifeblood of man, and that for the lifeblood of man, he will require an accounting. There's this idea that human life is qualitatively different from animal life, and it's infinitely more valuable. So we're to treat it with more respect and more dignity. And then finally, the third command is to put murderers to death. This is one of the few commands in the Bible that comes with a reason attached. And the reason here is the thesis that God has been building to with these 3 commands. He says, in the image of God, he made man. So we have not lost the image of God. Even after the fall, even after the corruption of mankind completely destroyed society and completely destroyed all of nature, we still have not lost the image of God. It's inherent in us. And the reason that we're to deal severely with murderers, the reason we're not to murder, and the reason that we're not to stoop to the level of animal predators is that we alone, among all other living creatures, are made in the image of God. We're to respect that in our internal lives, in our relationships with the people around us, and in our societies. Now, these commands, they don't exhaust the ways in which we're to respect the image of God in each other. Those are broad-reaching. It affects the fact that we are made in the image of God should affect the way that we treat each other in every aspect of our lives. But as I said earlier, these commands are specific injunctions that are meant to address the particular evils that led to the flood. The evils of murder, of blood feuds, and of animalistic reveling in violence. Finally, the last thing that God does to prevent creation from falling back into chaos is he gives us this sign. He forms a covenant with all of creation, with all living creatures. And he says, I have set my war bow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of my covenant. The word there is, a lot of translations have that say rainbow. That's because it's obvious what he's talking about, that he's talking about the rainbow, and that's the actual physical thing that is the sign of the covenant. But he gives this picture of he's hanging up his war bow. The word there is actually a bow, as in a war bow, as in something that you take into battle and you go to war with it. And he has hung that up. So he is never again going to go to war against all living creatures. And how does he accomplish this? Well, when he hangs the war bow up, it's now no longer pointing down at creation. It's now pointing up at God. And that means that if we break the covenant, if we fail to follow through, it's not creation that pays the price, it's God. And that happens. We see that happen in Christ, in the cross, that God pays the price for our failure to live up to the covenant. Because we're bound to fail. Our hearts are intent on evil from our very youth. We know that. But God has mercy. Judgment is God's strange work. He's desperate to show mercy. And through the cross, he takes the punishment that we deserve for failing to live up to the covenant. And he takes the consequences that should have fallen on creation. He takes them on himself. He's the one that's destroyed. And also through the cross, he brings healing. And through us, through his adopted sons, he's going to bring healing not just to humanity, but to all of creation. It says in Romans 8, verses 19 through 21, "For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption and into the glorious liberty of the children of God." Through the cross, God is changing our hearts. He's teaching us and realigning us with reality so that we can rule over our passions and submit them to him. And when Christ returns and we see him face to face, that process will be complete. And when that process is complete, then creation will no longer need to be subjected to futility, because we'll be revealed in all of our glory as sons of God, as humanity as we ought to be. And when that happens, we'll be able to subdue earth, subdue the earth properly. We'll be able to rule over the birds of the air and every creeping thing that lives on the face of the earth, and over the fish of the sea. We'll be able to rule over them justly and properly, because we will be in subjection to God. And at that point, creation will be released from its bondage to corruption and into the glorious liberty of the children of God. What an incredible hope we have in this passage. And I hope that it can carry us through any difficult times that we experience in our lives. Because like it says in the New Testament, it says God chastises those that he loves in order to shape them into the image of his Son. So when we experience difficult times, when we experience suffering and pain and tragedy and persecution, we can have hope that we're being shaped into the image of Christ. We're being taught how to subject ourselves to Him, how to rule over our passions, so that creation can be released from its bondage of corruption and healed and refined by God's refining fire, and the earth can finally be returned to the way that God intended it when He created it in the first place.